How is everybody doing? Strength Chat episode 147, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I'm joined by a coach and competitive bodybuilder with over 2 decades of experience. He's been involved in various published peer-reviewed literature, as well as articles for Elite FTS, Muscle Mag, and Flex magazine. Today I am joined by the one and only Scott Stevenson. How are you doing?
I'm phenomenal, man. Thanks for having me on.
No
And
worries at all.
thanks to John Meadows for making the connection. I pay him well to facilitate these things, so it sounds like it's paying off because here I am.
Yeah. If you haven't checked that out, episode 141, I think it was. So not too far,
Okay.
not too far afterwards.
I'll go look.
But thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on. Obviously, a little bit of a weird year, sort of the last year. What have you been up to? How did it look for you? What have you been doing?
I haven't been terribly impacted just because the way I've sort of created my career is I work from home, so it wasn't like I couldn't go to my workplace. And I've talked about this in years past. I mean, I'm working with online clients. I'm doing podcasts. I'm writing. I've got a couple books. So I do a lot of things. There would be days where, for me, like in a given year, 5-10 years ago, where I wouldn't talk to anyone in person unless it happened to be at the grocery store when I was picking up some food. And I would find myself just rattling off because I was so looking forward to the actual human interaction one-on-one. So it hasn't impacted me that much as far as sort of the depressive aspects and sort of flip-flopping, personal life.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I've had a lot of clients. This is not so much true now, but many clients who found that their ingenuity could really be provoked by the pandemic in terms of finding ways to make the training happen.
Yeah.
I have one client actually who's in the UK who had to fabricate some of his own stuff at home, as many people have, and started doing a lot of squatting and deadlifting, like kind of going back to the basics because he didn't have any fancy machines to train on.
Yeah.
And we had a little bit of a time in between a few of his check-ins, and maybe it'd been like a month, maybe in 5-6 weeks, and I hadn't seen his back. And I'm like, what gamma radiation did you direct onto your back? Because it looks ridiculous. And it's just because he had spent a lot of time under free bar, like doing those basic things that build the back, a lot of rack deads, bent over rows, and plus, squatting for him was something that just sort of thickened the back musculature too. So that's been kind of fun. Like there was a period of time, people can go back and look at my Instagram when the pandemic first happened and I was out of town. I was actually on a seminar tour with my dogs, with my truck camper, and all the gyms started closing. So I really couldn't do anything. I couldn't even really train at the gyms, much less go and do the talks that I was wanting to do.
Right.
So I was on my way home and my truck broke down. I was stuck for like 16 days in an RV park in the middle of Illinois, Mount Vernon, Illinois, which is middle of nowhere. And I was still training. So I just posted my videos of me training out in the field with whatever I could find. I had some bands, and like one of the actually John commented on this. His comment was "fee fi fo fum," because what I had done is I found this long post. It was part of a fence that, extra piece maybe, and I just tied bands around it, doubled them up, squatted down, got underneath it, and was squatting with it. And I racked it on the corner of a fence. So I got underneath it, squatted it up, and then had to step out. So I had clearance to squat down. But with all the tension on there, literally, I looked like a giant just pounding. There's a lot of awkward weirdness at first, but eventually I found ways to do all sorts of cool stuff, and people really like that. And I love doing that in the gym. That's one of the things I try to do as much as possible, is find those different angles, or different ways to use machines, or different exercises maybe in total that better match the loading curve with the strength curve. So you have an exercise that you feel tension that matches your strength abilities and the muscle capacity during the course of the full range of motion, as opposed to having a distinct sticking point somewhere in the range of motion, easy at the beginning, easy at the end, or just really hard at the end. You can never get a full rep, those sorts of things. So a lot of people like that. So I've actually had a good time adding the variety into my training, at least, and I haven't been lucky enough not to have been impacted. So how about you?
Yeah, so
Hung in
actually,
there?
when you're saying there about sort of the adaptability, the first start of the lockdown, me and my girlfriend were in the flat that we lived in, but unfortunately, yeah, I actually got offered a squat rack, but I don't think it would have gone down too well in a one-bedroomed flat, so I didn't end up taking that
Yeah.
up. I did
Oh,
end up pushing her car up and down the car park, which was pretty
nice. I
which
love
was
it.
pretty fun. And
Yeah.
then in the second lockdown, the gym got some new plates and new bars. So because obviously the second lockdown over in the UK it was still a lockdown, but it wasn't as sort of like strict as that. I could still go down to the gym and treat it as a little bit of an office. So I could still go down and train twice a week,
Right.
with the barbells and a couple of machines and that sort of stuff, which was good. But in the first lockdown at the start of the year, yeah, I completely agree with you. I found it quite interesting, people trying to figure out ways, or seeing what they've got to work with. Another coach that I know is based in Leeds, he actually did a workout with he had like the small jugs of milk all the way up to like the big full like 5 litre ones.
Yeah.
And treat them as like dumbbells, fill them up with water, just to be like,
Sure.
there is ways of doing it, which makes it a little bit more interesting, because yeah, especially in lockdown, not being able to go and do anything or go out and about, it can be interesting to see what people can work with and progress from there, which has been good. How was the work that have you been able to work on a couple of other projects over the like COVID period, if you like, or have you been able to put anything in place for next year?
We're kind of waiting. Like I worked with a company called TRA Performance. It was literally like, it was a week ago last year when I was in Scotland for a 2-day seminar. And so people were posting it up, on their Instagram memories and those sorts of things. And it's been that long. I want to come over there again. I've got, I don't know how many places now that have wanted to bring me over for talks. And it's funny, and this is connected with Jordan Peters and Paul Scarborough. Sort of originally, Paul was a client of mine a long while ago, and I work with Jordan as well. And they've just sort of made my name known, that I'm probably a better known individual. I don't want to say just a figure, let's say, in the fitness world in the UK than I am in the US. And I like the mentality. I mean, there'll be Americans listening to this, I'm sure, but there's a little bit of a different cultural mentality. I heard it on another podcast. Someone was saying that he was a fan of the Brits because of that sort of, kind of get after it, like no excuses, like, quit whining, and just make shit happen type of mentality. And that really lends itself best, I think, to trying to make progress in the gym, because it's not an easy pursuit, after the first couple of years. So we're kind of waiting for those things to, like, waiting for a true clearing before we start setting things up, because that just could be a nightmare, refunding money.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It sounded then as though you'd been listening to one of my sessions then, about saying, right, what we're doing today, let's get in and get it done. Yeah, definitely. I think mindset's got a good way of doing it, and there's always some, especially with the current circumstances, there's always a way you can move forward with training. For obviously, you mentioned there about being over in the UK and doing seminars, but for everyone listening who might not know your background in competing and coaching, just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah, I think I was born with the meathead gene, to be honest, because as long as I remember, I wanted to train with weights. And I finally started when I was 11, but I remember asking my mom, can I go and train someplace? There really was she was concerned I was going to stunt my growth. She didn't know any better. She was concerned for her son. And I wanted to do martial arts as well, but in my small town, there was nowhere to do that, but they did have a YMCA and some other gyms. So I started training when I was 11, and now I'm over a half a century old. I turned 50 a few months back. So
Right.
I started competing in my late 20s, and I've been competing since then. I've done a couple shows this year, actually. And as much as anything, I'm not vying for the Mr. Olympia, not even close. I know what that's about. People might know me in part because I was a training partner, and I've coached and helped out Dave Henry, who was the first Mr. Olympia, 202 Mr. Olympia, before they changed to 212. He won the same year the Dexter won, 2008.
Oh, okay.
He's still at it, as a matter of fact. Olympia's coming up, and people don't pay him enough attention, I don't think. So we'll see what happens here in a couple of weeks. So that was always sort of, I just loved the training. I remember like, here's an example, like back when I was in high school, there's a couple of these, but there was one program that was pretty asinine, but one of our strength coaches said, this is the way to do it. I was the only one who did it, because more is better, right? That's the bodybuilding mentality. And I sort of had that ingrained in me. And the workouts were, it was like 98 sets a day, full body, 3 times a week. And they took like 3 hours to do. And then there was conditioning drills there afterwards. So I would do like these 4.5 hour long workouts 3 times a week. And I was the only one who did it. None of the other athletes did it. It was just me. So that's sort of the way I've just loved the training aspect of things. But I'm also kind of a tinkerer by mindset. I guess I'm a sort of pseudo intellectual. I wouldn't say I'm a truly intellectual. I'm very, very, very curious.
Yeah.
So I figured out that there's some way I can probably make this passion of mine into my career. So I figured out that I love to teach. I love doing these podcasts like this. Are part of my mission, is to try to provide people with information that they can do with as they please. I don't want to tell anyone what to do. I'm not a guru. I'm just someone who's got some stuff he's sort of compiled together, and like, here you go, do with it what you will. If it makes sense, please do use it. So I when I was graduate from college, I was actually a German and physics double major, and didn't know anything about the possibility of exercise physiology and that sort of thing. But I figured that out, and eventually ended up with a PhD. Was a college professor for a couple of years. I've owned a gym for about 3 or 4 years. And part of that desire to help people, I also became a licensed acupuncturist along the way. Yeah. So that's a complete holistic form of medicine. So we've got herbs, which are the sort of natural equivalent to drugs. So I'm an acupuncture physician. That's the legal term that you can use in the state of Florida, and you can bill insurance if you're a practicing acupuncture physician. So I've got sort of a holistic meathead sciencey guy, been in the trenches for almost 40 years, been training for or competing for 25. And I'm just a kind of a junkie for learning and a junkie for helping people. So I'm pretty lucky that I get to do, pretty easily what I love to do. So.
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. Yeah. And, when you're saying there about, having experiences from all these different areas, I think that's a good way to be. And it's a good definition of just calling it as being, curious, because the key word that you said there is, not a guru. You put information out there and people take it as what it is. It is one of those things where, I once got told, if you think that you know everything, then you need to read more. You need to look at look at more, and that's the whole reason why I set up at the podcast, because it started out originally I've gone through a couple of mics, and maybe the sound quality hopefully is a little bit better, but it originally started off with my phone because people asked me a question, and I thought it'd be cool
in your car.
Cool. Yeah, definitely, and just be cool to say, wow, this is episode 1, and it's grown from there. And the coaches to be able to speak as people such as yourself to be able to pick your brains and questions that people have asked me that I might not know the answer to, but also to increase my knowledge a little bit more. And you can pick and choose from different areas, and take that into the gym and try it out yourself. So definitely, I think it's a good way to be, to keep learning and to pass on content, because of all the podcasts that I still surprised that there's been as many as what I've done. I only feel like I've still done a couple because I keep enjoying it. But if people can take some content or information from it and use that in the gym, that to me is the best thing, really, rather than just saying, oh, this is what I know, and then there's nothing else to it.
Right. As far as folks thinking about coaches or who to take information from, and this is a gross simplification, but it kind of occurred to me when you're talking about this, is that there are people who say, like, this is how it is. This is this is the way, this is the sort of the black and white perspective. And I was thinking about, like, how, like, for someone who's passionate about knowing and understanding, that's such a letdown. Because it's like, well, now if I knew everything, like, well, what? This isn't any fun anymore. Like, this is just, it would be like you get to compete once and then you never get to compete again. It's like, if you like to compete, if that's your thing, or like you do like 8 weeks of training and then and then there's nothing else to be had. You can't gain any more muscle. You can't get any more fit. That's it. Like that's there's nothing beyond that. And that's a categorically different mindset than someone who is like you are with trying to figure out how to make the podcast better and the nuances of the recording and the electronics and all the pieces that go into that. And a coach that is going to work with someone. And my book is Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. It's about becoming this person, or at least eliciting to the extent someone can, this curiosity that they have in learning on their own. I think there's intrinsic value in that. But in terms of finding a coach or learning from someone or listening to someone, you want the person who, in my opinion, this is just my thought, but embraces that unknown. Because when they come to you, or when you come to that coach or that quote unquote guru, that person who is the expert in some way, shape, or form, if they think they know it all, then that immediately blocks all sorts of paths of potentially knowing the nuances of you and figuring you out. That's a form of almost stereotyping. Like it's not fun when you every once in a while you run into someone you can, and I get this just being a muscular guy, it happens like, oh, like that guy's a brute. I can tell just looking at him. And I've had some really funny experiences with people who size me up, and they almost blurt out what's going on in the back of their mind. And like, that's not a fun way to interact. What you want is a coach that says, okay, I've seen some of these things here and but I need to ask you some more questions. I need to dig it because you are unique. You are to some degree a little bit of a snowflake. We're not going to treat you like that one necessarily. Buckling down and getting shit done is very important, but having that mindset of curiosity and recognizing that you don't know it all. And that's actually the kind of the fun and the glory of it, is figuring out new things.
Yeah, definitely.
Because just think of any aspect of human history and how technology's progressed, our knowledge has progressed. Things are so different now than they were a decade ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. And some of those folks 1,000 years ago, like many people today, think we got it all figured out. It's like, nope, no, it's a lot different now than it was then. So things are constantly, that's the nature of reality. So that's why I like to combine like the in the trenches, empirical, like this is what I see, this is what I experience. Like, okay, this seems to do something. And then the science side of things, which is just basically infinitely fascinating for me, is a way to potentially explain those things. And the thing that I'm sort of getting into podcast topics now, but the thing that sometimes happens is, and this is the same sort of, we like to compartmentalize things and say it's either, bullshit bro science or it's scientifically validated, is the things that you see or an experience in the gym as a bro who may have never looked through medlines, never read a scientific study, are happening in the very same universe as the things that are going on in a lab.
Yeah.
But as the criticisms often apply to lab scientists, like, well, do you actually train? You don't look like you have you ever bled under the bar? No. So you don't know what I'm talking about. And then a lab scientist, you won't see this that often. There's a different mentality there, but there's a massive amount that goes into being able to conduct experiments in a scientifically valid way that you simply, unless you're very, very, very intelligent, there are people who've done this kind of self-taught, but you don't know whether or not the statistical analysis they've applied is appropriate or what the limitations of their experimental design are. So those sorts of things, they all happen. The guy goes and trains, he does 3 sets of 10 in the gym on a Saturday morning, and a guy goes into the lab on a Saturday morning, does 3 sets of 10. Those are happening in the same world, but what could be evoked there could be totally different. The one guy is using ammonia smelling salts, and he's got Metallica jamming, and he's got chalk, and he's got 5 guys screaming at him. And the other guy goes in, and there's no music, and he's got a guy in a lab coat with a pencil protector and and a clipboard, and he's like, okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, let's start your first set. You can't compare those things as an example that I think most people can resonate with. So
yeah,
knowing those two, I try to bring those things together and help people from sort of both camps. The scientists, a lot of them actually, there's a lot of really astute guys that are out there. You know some of these names who are well-trained scientists who also walk the walk, which is awesome to see. Yeah. But the other way around is not so much. So anyway, I like to bring those things together because I think it's a great way to help people learn and get an understanding that there's validity to various different ways of knowing.
Definitely. I know for myself, I completely agree. Having come from when I came to Leeds and I did a sport and exercise science degree, and you look at the science side of things, which is interesting. But since, going more into the, as you say, in the trenches, actually training in the gym, you pick up other things that, that you have that university mindset, but then when you're training in person, some things work that, oh well, actually, I've tried it out with a couple of people and that's headed that in the right direction. I think it's good to have that balance rather than, the pendulum swing too far one way or the other with the academic and the bro
Yeah.
science side of things, which is good to be have that balance. I mean, I must admit, sometimes I remember, trying to read the first journal that I ever read. It was a little bit hard to,
Right.
to digest. And then actually, when you put it down and you think, oh, well, actually, I did this in the gym. Oh, well, actually, yeah, that makes sense. That's a little bit more, because
Yes.
the practical side of things, I think people need that see the. For me, I learn better when I do things, and if I read something, and then obviously you want to try it out, and I think that works well, with the clients that you're seeing, rather than just saying, right, we're going to do this because this study on these many people said that it would work.
Mm-hmm.
But you said it at the start of this chat. Everyone's an individual, and sometimes you need to factor into into the equation. Which quite nicely leads into the topics that I kind of had in mind. Obviously, a couple of topics for anyone listening who have heard you on other podcasts, might have covered, and it's sort of the planning and periodization of building muscle and getting stronger. And the first question I wanted to ask was sort of, it's like the chicken and the egg question, chicken or the egg question. Are you when you're planning out your phase of training? Where is the muscle? Are you looking to build muscle first, or build the strength first? What are you looking in terms of when people are starting to put their program together?
First and foremost would be setting your goals.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you mentioned muscle and strength, and those are. I actually have a talk that I give. I think I may have given it in Scotland. I've got a bunch of them. They'll kind of get. I can't remember when I've given which ones, but the difference between powerlifters, and maybe I'm going away from the topic you want to cover, but
Okay.
what powerlifters are trying to do, strength athletes, is diabolically opposed to what bodybuilders are trying to evoke in terms of the training. They're really very much the opposite. Bodybuilders are trying to focus the stimulus of the loading on the muscle to basically hack into the biology that evokes muscle growth. You want to make the if you're trying to train your quads and to give an exercise, sometimes if you're doing compound exercise, you're trying to get everything, but you're trying to make the metabolic stress, the tensile forces, everything as difficult to basically strengthen and accentuate and amplify the signal that tells the muscle that it's incapable of handling the stresses, and what it needs to do is become larger in order to tackle the next time it's going to be exposed to that particular weight training session. So as a very simple example, you want to use as little muscle as possible. Don't use, if you want to do a chest press where you train your pecs, you don't want to have your triceps and your anterior delts involved. They're great ways to do that. You can maybe evoke a higher EMG and activation doing an incline press versus a cable fly, potentially. So different variety in training is different because of the activation. Strategies will be different, and that's an important aspect of variety and what will bring about muscle growth. But if you're a power lifter and you want to bench press as much as possible, you want to get everything involved. A lot of guys, they're talking about using it, get your lats involved, or at least try to do this anatomically. Like you're creating a cushioning with the lats, so to speak. They're not so much driving the force from a biomechanical standpoint. You want to have all the muscle mass involved possibly in a bench press is more so a triceps exercise. For many guys, some of the best benchers in the world have their elbows tucked really, really close. They're not trying to make it a pec exercise. And I'll mention, there's a particular study. There's several studies that sort of substantiate the idea of a mind-muscle connection, that you can say, do this exercise, and they use EMG to measure this or to evaluate this. Do this exercise, and I want you to use your pecs for this press. And there's several, at least 3 studies, I believe, that have done this. And they have found that people with the greatest amount of experience have the best ability to do that generally, in this one particular study I'm thinking of. So when you're starting off, like some people, I facetiously call them motor morons. They'll do an exercise and like literally looking at the muscle, watching it contract, and it hurts, and they can't tell which muscle's moving the weight. Just like it's kind of bizarre. Like there's a disconnect there. So they're like there's like the head's here and the body's separate, and somehow there's a connection, but they have no idea what's going on. And as people, as you get better at training and evoking this mind-muscle connection, learning how to do it, that would ideally, of course, make you a better bodybuilder. But there's one particular study that was interesting, and they plotted years of training versus the difference in EMG in a chest. I think it was a flat bench press, chest bench press versus bench press with a focus on your pecs. And there was a correlation. There was a relationship there. The difference between try to use just your pecs versus just bench press was greater the more years of training folks had. But if you went out to the very end of the training experience axis of that plot, there were two guys, I think they were all men in the study. There's two subjects who had like 20 years of experience. And one of them had the best ability to evoke the mind-muscle connection based on these EMG data. And the other guy couldn't do it for shit. What was interesting, I would have loved to have known the training experience of those guys, what they'd done, because some guys they bench press to be better bench pressers.
Yeah.
And then some bodybuilders, you'll see, even the old school way, which can be a shoulder wrecker. So I'm not suggesting you just start doing this, but elbows high, bring the bar down to your clavicles, that sort of thing. Make it like a Vince Garanda style. I think Vince used to do that. Like a lot of bodies will do that. And that can destroy your shoulders potentially, but it gets the pecs really, really, really well. So I wonder if the one guy had been training for 20 years, like he had been training using the pressing exercises to get a bigger chest, and he was really good at that.
Yeah.
And the other guy was like, I can't even wrap my head around using a bench press for anything other than just moving maximal weight.
Yeah.
And so there's a difference there between strength training and hypertrophy training.
Yeah.
And where you set your goal is going to basically direct how you're going to strategize your training in terms of periodization, all those sorts of things. So if you're a bodybuilder, what you're trying to do is totally different than what you're trying to do as a power lifter. So those are like completely different worlds. It's like, are you trying to go to the moon, or you're trying to like dig a hole to China? Like totally different directions.
Definitely. Yeah. And when you're sitting down and talking about the goals, is there a conversation or a place where you are going to have to add in some strength training to be able to have a better hypertrophy phase and be able to build a little bit more muscle, depending on where where that client is within their sort of training journey, if you like?
There's so many ways to answer that. So it's such a big question. So like one thing that I have tossed out for people to consider, if let's say someone's a bodybuilder, so kind of narrow this and not speak so generally, excuse me, is if you have a weak muscle group, let's say the muscle you've been training for 5-6 years, and you have a weak muscle group, meaning it's not as hypertrophied as you like it to be, you can look at a couple of different things. One, do you have a good mind-muscle connection? Does the muscle get a good pump? Does it get sore? And that would tell you that you're able to actually activate the target muscle during the exercise you're trying to use to make that muscle grow. That's kind of an obvious thing. Yeah. You see sometimes, not always, because many times guys who have like really strong muscle groups, when they don't train them that often, and they also get a really good pump in them. That may be because they're relatively untrained because they don't train them that often, and they just naturally have biomechanics and an innervation activation strategy sort of built into their motor programming to make that muscle the one that's used the most. And that makes sense. If the body has, during a pressing movement, anterior delts, triceps, and pecs to choose from, serratus anterior, whatever else is involved with a press, and the pecs are just the biggest mover by far, it makes sense to make use of that, draw that into, if you have 3 guys that are going to pull a truck or push a car down the roadway, and one guy's 300 pounds, the other guy's 200 pounds, the other guy's 100 pounds, you want to make sure you don't have them each push with equal amount of force. You make use of that 300-pound person, because that's where your advantages are. So people who have good muscle groups may do that, and others may not get sore, they may not get a pump. So finding a mind-muscle connection is important. But getting back to your question, another thing that's worth considering too is are you strong on that muscle group? Are you relatively strong in training, doing the exercises that are supposed to target that muscle? And there's kind of two ways to look at this. So, and as well as, do you have good muscle endurance there? So let's take the back, for instance. So this is where you have to kind of unravel things and see, like, look at it. So if what I've been doing is working, then keep doing it. But if what I've been doing hasn't been working, then what are some basic principles I can apply that I haven't to produce progress? So here's what I might mean. Let's say someone has a weak back, and we've got one scenario where they just use machines. They do like a lot of face pulls, and they're just not strong on back movements. None of them. But they know when they get in and they do rack deads, maybe even deadlifts, various pulling movements, T-bar rows, bent over rows, their back gets whacked. But they're relatively weak. They go with their training partners, they're as strong as them on pressing and leg movements, what have you, but their back movements are weak. In that case, there's an obvious sort of deficiency there, where it sounds to me like a viable option, this does work out in the long run, is get stronger at those movements that you know from the soreness, the pump, that you're not strong at, and that's where the muscle's weak. So that's the time when you need to go in and really focus on the progressive overload. There is an association between strength of a muscle and size of a muscle. Not one-to-one, but there's something to say there. The other situation could be that someone's gotten so strong, like there are guys who will get, like, I don't want to throw him under the bus, but he's an example that is constantly put forth, just popped into my head. Buddy of mine lives here in Tampa. I know Ben Pakulski, IFBB pro Ben Pakulski, was criticized for having a weak back, but the guy was an amazing deadlifter. Yeah. Actually, when Jordan Peters, who everyone knows there, I'm sure, is a very strong deadlifter. Jordan trained with Ben here in town years ago. This has been a while, when Ben was still actively competing, and Ben's very competitive in the gym, and obviously Jordan can be too. And I think like Ben beat Jordan by like 1 rep on the heaviest set that they worked up to, or something like that. So he was that level of deadlifting strength, but his back, nothing like Jordan's.
Yeah.
So for Ben, and this is probably, I'm not going to talk for Ben as far as his training regime, but for Ben, getting that big deadlift probably didn't necessarily hurt his back, but choosing exercises that lended themselves more to activating those muscles that were not growing the way he wanted them to, and then progressively overloading there would have been his way to go. So you can get progressively strong on exercises that are supposed to target the back in a certain way, and that not work for you. So that's one piece of that puzzle. The other piece is the dose response to that. And that can be, this is a whole other kind of possibility. If someone, let's say deadlifts are a great exercise for them, and they're so motivated, and I don't know if this is the case at all with Ben, but Ben was an extraordinarily motivated bodybuilder and businessman. You know, he's eye of the tiger kind of guy. He's kind of known for his intensity in the gym. But you can do too much. You go and start doing like 10 sets of deadlifts to failure. Deadlifts could be a really good exercise for producing muscle growth, and you get really, really strong on those, but you're not allowing for the recovery, which is necessary for the growth to happen.
Yeah.
So the devil's in the dose, so to speak. So you could have the right medicine and the wrong dose in terms of exercises. So progressive overload is important. If that's not working, then look at the exercise. Did I just get strong on an exercise that isn't a good one for me? Or am I doing too much of the right exercise and not recovering in terms of sleep, food, supplements, all the other things that would go into that puzzle? So you could be missing the boat in various ways, but progressive overload is sort of a key essential feature as long as you've got recovery in place and you've got the right exercises in place.
Yeah,
getting
definitely.
stronger with those things in place is going to mean a bigger muscle for most people, generally speaking. That's the basic tenet I think we can hold to pretty well.
Do you think a couple of sort of points off there, and you know, I spoke about the strength training and the muscle building, but based on the goal and what their starting point is, do you think that is sort of where you know, some people can go wrong, that they sort of gravitate to more of the things that they like and maybe overdo those a little bit more, rather than trying to take a step back sometimes and thinking, right, actually, what is it, you know, I need to work on? Do you think that's where especially people for when they first start doing the training programs, or start seeing a little bit of progress, that they just go to town on one thing and don't look at the bigger picture?
That comes back to why you're actually doing this in the first place. So that question, and this is, there's no right or wrong here, but that question sort of presumes that someone has as their primary goal to become the best bodybuilder they possibly can, let's say. And that may be something that, they're definitely not going to reject. It's like, I woke up, I look like Ronnie Coleman. Nah, I don't want that physique. Let's undo that wish. I want another one. So some people want to go and they want an activity that they relish, that they have fun with. And knowingly, I've gone in and done training sessions that were not optimal, that were beyond what I probably should have done, given where I was able to recover from. I was pre-contest or what have you, just because I wanted to train that way.
Yeah.
And I've trained probably more than I should over the years, and been sore continuously for so long. It definitely hasn't been. I'm almost certain now that I've probably done too much over the years, but I really have enjoyed all those training sessions. I just really like that. So, would I go back and do it over? Probably, at some points in time, just to kind of like confirm those thoughts. If I could go back and like conduct that experiment with myself, to say my future self, say, Scott, cut your volume in half. Let's see what happens. I'd love to do that,
Yeah.
But some people, if you if you like to go in the gym and let's say if bench pressing big weight is what gets you in the gym, like this is like a very kind of common, I've seen this so many times. It's probably more in the US than maybe in the UK, but guys will go in. The first thing they do is they bench press. They love to bench. They love to get under the bar. It gives them a sense of like, I'm a man and hear me roar type of thing. And like a lot of these younger guys, but let's say, but in doing that, they get in the gym, they do their bench press, they bench 2 or 3 times a week. It's not optimal for getting a bigger bench or what have you, but they also train the other things and it keeps them going. Then that's probably better than saying, you should have a balanced push-pull legs workout, and you should keep a logbook, and you should do all these other things, and then they don't do it because their adherence goes down. So that has to be balanced.
Yeah.
And everyone's different. The recipe for that is going to be different for everyone. I think some people are willing, and here's another example from the bodybuilding world. And I wish I could go back and I wish I could figure out what happened with this person, but he always pops to mind. So there was a guy who really wanted to get big, and he did what very, very few people would do. Powerlifters will do this because they just want to get as strong as possible, and there's a different mentality there. They will just get big and bulky and sloppy, and they don't give a rat on average. Like, this is true of everyone, but there's a mentality that generally doesn't give a rat's ass about being a pretty boy when they go in the gym. They want to be a friggin' monster. And this guy was back on the Intense Muscle bodybuilding board. This is decades ago. I don't remember his screen name, but I remember he had a log that went on for several years. I think he was doing DC training. The guy trained like an absolute animal, and his strength was going up like ridiculously, week by week, month by month, over the course of 2 or 3 years of logbooking. And he also was getting pretty sloppy, but he knew from those strength levels and just how much bigger he was getting that he was gaining a lot of muscle. He knew that he knew he was going to have to take it off eventually, but he knew the progress was there. And then he had a formula for gaining muscle on a consistent basis. So for him, the priority and the focus on the muscle gaining and knowing what he was doing overrided, keeping his body fat below 20%. And he was a young guy. I don't think he had any health issues that came with that. He wasn't becoming diabetic, or he wasn't using shitloads of gear or insulin or anything like that. So for him, that floated his boat. Many people have an internal break that says, I can't get in my jeans, my belly's hanging over, my wife doesn't even want to look at me, much less, have sex with me, or whatever it might be. Like, I just don't feel good. My self-esteem is negatively impacted by, being this big and overweight. For this guy, that meant progress. He's like, I go in the gym and I'm an animal each and every time. And it was totally worth it for him. So there's that propensity to kind of do what you're good at. If that brings you happiness and maybe isn't optimal, then I think I would choose that for most people. And actually, it doesn't even matter. If you deny people doing what they like, then they will maybe cease and desist from the behavior altogether, because why do it if you don't enjoy it?
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned it there, adherence, and yeah, if you've still got to keep in there, sprinkles of stuff that they like, as well as depending on
Yes.
what their goal is. Because I think, especially from what you're chatting about there, sometimes people like the idea of actually building muscle, getting bigger, but then actually when it comes to it, they're quite happy sort of sitting wherever they are and never pushing it and heading towards that direction. They're just sort of sitting, oh no, well, we're just I'm just happy with what I'm doing, rather than changing or working on those areas or changing it around, so that they can actually get bigger. Whereas as soon as I think put that mindset into, right, actually, looking at what I want to do, yes, this is what I enjoy, but these are the other areas I want to work on, then you can start making progress. Because ultimately you still want to see progress, when you're going into the gym, to see that you're getting better, whether it's getting bigger or whatever your goal is. That kind of goes on to, sorry, go on.
I have this is, I think, a thought that could be very helpful for the listeners. So I want to share this. So especially now, like in the last few years, with social media being one of the things that colors our perspective on what kind of progress can be had and what you should look like when you're making progress, because you're not getting a representative cross section of people when you look at Instagram. The people who look the best are the ones who have the most followers, who the algorithms present to you, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a gigantic blind spot there, just in terms of what you're seeing as being like sort of average, or what you would expect to be average, because you're not seeing an average. 30 years ago, you go in the gym and you'd see the average, unless you went to like, Venice Golds or, one of the big gyms where there's lots of competitors. So you'd have a kind of perspective, and there would be other people that there would be probably fewer of them, but other guys, let's say, who are trying to put on size, and you would see them struggling with gaining some body fat and gaining an X amount of muscle. You have a more realistic perspective of what the average person might be able to obtain. So there's a blind spot there that's created by social media as to what we see as being, represented and possible. And also, for a given individual, you make gains really, really rapidly initially.
Yeah.
Sorry. Suki, there's a big sign that says "Do not knock." Hey, Suki, stop barking. Suki, come here. Suki, come here. I gotta shoot until she comes away from the door. She'll keep barking. Suki, hey, good girl. So
just wanted to get involved with the podcast.
If it's not an authentic podcast, if the dogs don't bark at some point in time. So what happens beyond that sort of comfort zone where you've gained a good amount of muscle and maybe some body fat is unknown. And it's something where it might be, if I just plod along, I gained 20 pounds of muscle in the first 2 or 3 years, and the next year I gained like 3. And if I just plod along, and really push it, someone's, so they put on like maybe 30 pounds. So let's say a person is going to just use pounds, because they go from 170 to 200 pounds. And that person, many people have just their metabolism, their GI, everything set up. Gaining weights can be very, very difficult for them. Others can gain weight more easily. You see this when you see people who are 500 pounds. I don't think I could ever be 500 pounds no matter what I did. It'd be impossible for me to do that. Some people can do that relatively easily. So there's tremendous variability here. But so beyond that, like 200 pound level, someone might need to go along and spend 10 years gaining 5 pounds a year to get from 200 to 250. And they might get, like, let's say it's half of that is muscle mass over those next 10 years. And that's tough. But the difference between they gain 20 or 25 the first 2 or 3 years, and then they gain 25 the next 10 years. And that is something that you don't know how that's going to be. It might be that that's not going to happen. It might be that when you start pushing the weight up initially after those 200 pounds, that you start holding like water like crazy, and you see like this really sort of relatively in a matter of days or weeks abrupt blurring of the muscle definition that you had, and that sluggishness and the low back pumps. And that might, depending on how you deal with your diet, with cleanup weeks and mini diets and those sorts of things, you might be able to keep that under control. But you don't know what that future holds until you try to go there. And the examples of people doing that are few and far between. You don't see them on Instagram. You don't see them in your gym. It's not something the average person wants to do. So that's the thing, is that some people, I guess getting back to the question, I think that led me to this thought, is that the attractiveness of putting in that work over those 10 years is substantially reduced, because you don't know if it's going to be worth it. It's kind of like you go to a job, it's like, this job's okay, but if I just buckle down, I'd look back and like, there are 20 examples of people who just did the right things, and they had average work production, and then they made, partner in the law firm. It takes 10 years to make partner. Or if you're a professor, usually 7 years is kind of a number you see a lot of departments, a lot of universities to become fully tenured. If you don't make it, then they boot you. So it's like, if I just buckle down, then in 7 years I'll be there. But you don't have that. And that difference between the muscle, those extra 25, that's doubling the amount of muscle mass you gain. That's going from looking like a guy like, yeah, you look like you work out, you probably do some curls now and again, to a guy's like, that dude's yoked. That guy's big, man. That guy looks really impressive, because now you're a 220 pound person, as opposed to a 200 pound person, and leaner, relatively speaking. And that's a dramatic difference. So that's one thing that people, it's hard. I can't say, because there's so much variability, that if you just buckle down and really push, and so it's not attractive for this one particular guy I mentioned, whose name I can't remember. I remember seeing on the boards. He knew from the strength gains and everything else that he was doing the right thing, and that was just his mentality. He just is like, for him, the intrinsic value of going down this kind of a hero's pathway of, I'm going to go in and I'm going to beat gravity's ass every single day for the next 5 years of my life. There won't be a bit of food left on my plate, blah, blah, blah. That for him was the way to go. That's how he wanted to live, and other people are like, if you could guarantee me, that I'm going to get 25 pounds of muscle with 50 pounds of body weight at 5 pounds a year on average for the next 10 years, I'll do it. Yeah. But anything short of a guarantee, like, deal with the devil, it's going to happen no matter what. I'm not going to do it. So that's a thing I think that people could kind of keep in mind, is that you don't know what your potential is unless you've really pushed. And Jordan is a perfect example of someone, who's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and he's inching his way up. And he was benching 400 pounds, I think, when he was still a teenager. So Jordan had pretty good genetics.
Yeah.
Maybe not in terms of symmetry and some other things that go into becoming the best bodybuilder in the world, but putting on muscle mass and being strong, he's pretty good. So that's the thought I thought I would share with people, is that what you're seeing is not representative of potential and possibility, because there's no one walking that path. You're just seeing people who are of elite or very, very, very good genetics, or maybe using a lot more supplements than you would ever think about doing, who have good followings, who've take pictures that are filtered with the right angles and the lighting and all that kind of stuff. So keep that in mind. You don't know what you might be able to do, and it could be really, really rewarding to go down that no man's land and find out that is the place where you want to be, and that there are unknown gains to be had down the path, the road less traveled, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
yeah, definitely. I think when you're saying there about with the role that social media has, you only see sort of like a snippet and see sort of the end product, if you like, and you don't know the background with that, and that sort of goes on to another question that I kind of wanted to touch on. Was obviously you talk about cycles of training, so this is going to be the block, but you can see other things where it's like, right, this is a 6-week shred or whatever it may be, from the coaching that you've delivered, and from your own training. What is the best practices of how long cycles are going to last? What's going to be how are you going to rotate those, and when are you going to add in breaks in training, or drop things down a little bit? Because I think sometimes, like what you're saying there, people will dive into a program, but then not have an actual mindset of, right, actually this is the sequence of what we're gonna work through to push themselves, like what you say, to see what their potential is.
This comes back down to goals and like where you're trying to go, what's reasonable. So if I decide, you know what, I'm in Florida, I want to be on the beach in LA by tonight, and I'm going to drive. It ain't going to happen. Like, it doesn't matter what vehicle. There's no car that's going to get me there that fast. So if someone you need to set reasonable expectations in terms of your goals that are actualizable, that are measurable, that are quantifiable, that you can know whether you reach, and that you can track your trajectory as well. And then set a reasonable path in terms of training that is going to be somewhat set in stone. And this is a matter of the individual. There's some people who just kind of need to be told, you go in and get after it and you train today. That's going to happen. But I'm a huge believer in very intelligently auto-regulating your training in terms of how you periodize, even on a day-to-day basis. Part of my fortitude training regime involves auto-regulation in terms of the volume that you're using, the different volume tiers, auto-regulating the exercises that you choose, actually even the way that you execute one of the set types. There's some other ways too that are a little more nuanced that I have to explain more for them to make sense to the listeners. But so you have to figure out, I'm going from point A to point B, and then be able to know how you're doing as far as that path goes. So it'd be kind of like, if you ever had, they're better now, but you ever had like a GPS that, like, you're on like a side road or whatever, and it thinks you're on the main highway and you're on the or vice versa, and it's telling you to do something that's impossible. That's basically what is going to happen if you're trying to like follow a set path without paying attention to where you actually are. Like, you make a right turn, and like you just go off the highway and you're in the ditch because there's no right turn to make. You're not on the road I thought you were on. So you need to know where you are. So as a simple example of that, let's say someone is set for themselves. And I have this is all in to give people some, if they want some more detail on this, in my Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book, I sort of structure the book's sort of a compository of all sorts of various topics. It's a resource guide for various things related to bodybuilding. So you can like tell me more about the value of essential amino acids, or like 15 pages on amino acids. But the main structure of the book is sort of creating a year-round plan, which just works with our calendar.
Yeah.
And so you would have a post-contest period, or a post-photo shoot, or maybe a post-summertime when you want to be leanest, and then an off-season where you try to make gains, and maybe a pre-contest. So that's the way I've structured it for a competitive bodybuilder, or generically someone. Most people do that. They bulk up and then they cut back. It's kind of the way it goes. It's seasonal, makes sense. So let's say you've got you now have 9 months. So let's say 6 months to make the gains that you want to make, and to move up and be in the middle of the next weight class. And then you've given yourself 3 months to diet down. So that's your general plan. And you get 2 months into that 6 month off season period, and you're doing an evaluation of your body composition, and you put on 20 pounds, and 8 of those or 12 of those are fat, and 8 of those are fat-free mass. What you can tell, because you're power shoving the food. Like there's food there, you see it, then you eat it. Whatever it is, the pies that come out of the oven, the donuts that you drive past, whatever it is, you're eating it, everything possible. And so at those 2 months, you don't, if the plan was to continue to eat with the caloric excess over those 6 months to progressively gain the 10 pounds of muscle mass or fat-free mass that you hoped you'd get, that might be a little bit too much. Let's just say that's the number you have, just an easy number to keep in your head. And you also need to diet back down within a reasonable time. At the current rate, you're going to have, triple the 12 pounds, you're going to have 36 pounds of fat that you've gained, that you're going to try to lose in 3 months. Now, is that going to happen? No, but you're gaining fat at a higher rate than you're gaining muscle, and you're on a trajectory where you're going to have to start dieting much earlier. That could be okay. If you really got 8 pounds of fat-free mass, that's really 8 pounds of muscle, then go for a couple more months, hold that, and then extend your dietary period. You could completely shift the relative time frames of your off-season and your pre-contest if your gains were awesome. And there are reasons to do that. Like if you look at the mechanisms of muscle memory in terms of epigenetic programming and satellite cells and just the neurological gains that are neurological adaptations that come with being stronger, which comes with gaining that muscle mass. There's something to say for just holding the muscle mass that you've recently gained for a while before you start dieting down. So it might be like, well, shit, I got another month of this. I'm going to have the 12 pounds. Pay attention to water. Water can, depending on the body composition analysis you're doing, like the water can really mix things up. But if you're fairly certain that somehow you gained, like this would be an extraordinary circumstance, you got the muscle you want in 4 months, but you need those extra 2 months to diet, then that's okay.
Yeah.
I would not suggest give me some more muscle, and then you end up like 45 pounds of fat to diet off. That's a recipe for losing that muscle mass, and that happens a lot. I've seen that there was a podcast. My podcast is Muscle Minds. It's on the Think Big Network or Advice Radio. And what was his name? Scott McNally just did an episode with a national level competitor in the U.S. who did that. He got up over 300 pounds. Blanking on his name right now, and he came back down and he weighed like a pound more than he had previously, but he had to like literally destroy himself to make weight and get in shape. So the way in which you strategize those things and plan out your mesocycles and macrocycles have to do with where you're trying to go and where you are on that path. If you make a wrong turn, then you have to change your direction and maybe add in, like in that case, after 2 months of that, you might say, okay, I need to cut out the donuts. Like I need to stop, pardon the parlance here, but stop eating like an asshole, and start eating in a more bodybuilder friendly way. And that might in of itself just help clean up the body composition a little bit. Or you might have to do a bit of a mini diet. So you drop out all that junk, try to get some of the fat, hold on to the muscle, and then sort of get a restart and move from there. So the preset, the most bizarre example of this is sometimes you'll get these like a one-off diet is what people typically call that. And sometimes if you don't have any idea what to eat, someone can give you like, here's a basic meal plan, start with this. And that can be a very, very important thing for someone who doesn't like know how to get enough protein in and, just doesn't know basic dietary information. But the real magic comes in making the adjustments based on where you're going. So that's controlling the accelerator and moving the steering wheel, adjusting the air conditioning, like all the things to make sure the ride is going the way you want it to. And you could have the right car, start off like, here's your Lexus, but you don't know how to drive. You don't know where you're going. It doesn't matter that you've got the best starting diet if you don't know how to adjust it by adding food at the appropriate amounts, and maybe even with a nutrient timing approach and all those other nuances it doesn't make a difference how good the diet is or how good the training system is. If you have a great training regime and you keep training beyond which, and this is another thing that is important to answering your question, is monitoring your recovery. And I have a perceived recovery scale that I use. I mean, some people use heart rate variability. Resting heart rate works. You can look at local recovery of the muscles that you're training. Is one muscle always sore, the other's not? Various ways you can look into that, but all those things would go in. And just because it says on paper, I'm doing an 8-week block of training, and you get to 6 weeks and you're like, I don't want to go to the gym at all. I just want to stay in bed all day long. Like, it's probably time to have a deload. If you get to 8 weeks and you're like, shit's just taken off now, this is phenomenal. I feel gravity is my bitch today, baby. I'm nope, that's 8 weeks. I got it. It's an off day. God damn it. So as long as you can be honest with that recovery and the progress you're making and combining that information, then being flexible, titrating the diet, adjusting the training is super important. And that really, if you consider the scope, and there's so many examples of this, of biological individuality. Well, some people just gain like crazy. They drive by the gym and they put on a couple ounces of muscle, and other people struggle for months to get that. Then the idea that you can take one set program and just throw it out and have like that be like, so here's your, 8 weeks and 2 weeks cycle, or this is the meso macro or whatever. It's sort of asinine, really. It's like, it like, you'd almost be like saying, so, okay, so you're a male, you're an adult male in the UK. Here are the best clothes for you. It's like, no, that's I'm 230 pounds. It doesn't fit me. Like I'm not a gangster rapper. I don't need a big clock hanging off my neck. That's not my style. It doesn't fit. It's not my style. It's not comfortable. Like, there's so many reasons why that clothing does not fit me, that it's just kind of crazy. But that's essentially what you're doing to some degree if you think you can just sort of generalize and universalize specifically the training regime or a diet for someone and say a one size fits all thing is there's just no way that could possibly work. It can be a starting point. And I'll say this too, because a lot of coaches will start off like, okay, let's put you on this. And then I want to see how you adjust or how you adapt. It's like, okay, well, I moved you from your diet here to this, and you're starving. Okay, that's good. We can add a lot more food. This doesn't work for you. You're always bloated. You feel constipated. That's not going to work. So there's something to say for having a starting point. Try this on. Let's see how oh, nope, that's not going to work. We're getting rid of the bling. You don't need the clock on your neck. That's just not your thing. You look really embarrassed wearing that. We're going to try something else. So that as a starting, that's a good thing. But so trial and error is very, very important along the way, but you have to be smart about it. So I wish I could give you a simpler answer, but it's really about being mindful as you go along.
Yeah, no, not all. I thought that was a really good answer. There's a few. I wish I'd have taken. I'll listen to this back and take a few examples that you mentioned there. I thought that was a really good example of you're going from A to B, but there's things that you're going to adjust in the car as you go, which is 100% true. That it is a little bit of a trial and error, and it goes back to what we're saying at the start about. You're always learning, and that's the fun of because everyone starts out training because they enjoy it. It's a passion, and then if you end up going into the coaching side, the coaching side of things, it's problem solving. It's being curious and seeing what's working. And I think you see these main programs of this is a block of training, and this is the result that it's going to achieve, but that should just be the template or the structure. But within that, you can have a little bit of flexibility to see what works with you. And when you mentioned there about if you've hit your muscle or whatever that would be, just stay there and then think, right, what I've got what I want to achieve. Do you think sometimes where people sort of can stray off is maybe being a little bit too greedy, trying to get a little bit too more muscle, or potentially try and rush too much, or back off a little bit too soon when it starts getting a little bit tough?
Yeah, it can be. I mean, if that is part, as long as, I mean, you don't want to see people doing things that are injurious to themselves. Where they're like, they start a cycle and they make some gains. They're like, so more is better, so they add more in, and and next thing you know, they've gained 50 pounds, and 20 of it's water, and their eyes are yellow. It's like, okay, so that's they kind of like they're liking this, but that's probably not the smartest approach. So yeah, that sometimes can be the case. I think it's a matter of balancing, enjoying the process of making the progress. And I'm an example of this. I don't want to be a hypocrite, but one of the way that I learn things sometimes is if I suspect okay, so that's sort of the line there. That's the too much line. I'm going to just be certain of that by stepping over it for a little bit, just to be sure. And it helps me learn these things. And I did that with my training system way back when. At one point, for one of the years that after I'd first developed fortitude training, I dieted down for a show using the highest volume tier and the turbo version, which is the highest frequency. And just to see what that would be like, to kind of put myself in, that was very much of an overreaching, very close to overtraining place. In fact, fortitude training came about from overtraining. Literally the one time I ever really truly did that, it's kind of documented in the book, I just destroyed myself. But I was making really good gains for a while, and I stuck to a particular program that said go this long, and then I pushed way past. And then I had to take like a couple months. It was like I was definitely overtrained. It was not pretty at all. I was a wreck. So there's something to say for enjoying what you're doing, but also being realistic about knowing what it is you're doing if it is possibly too much. So let's say someone's a bodybuilder, and they're like, for the first time they're making really good strength gains, and they like going to the gym, and like now they're doing rack deads with over 5 plates they feel like one of the big boys, and they've wanted to feel that way for the longest time. It just feels good, and they know they're getting a little bit round, and they got the moon face going, and their wife's slapping in the belly every other day, like giving them some shit, but it's still okay. They know they're getting fat. They know, but it's not like It's not like they're putting themselves in dire health risk by doing so. There's no harm from this. So they're enjoying the process. And a lot of time, mostly we learn from our mistakes, to be honest. At least I have. Like, hopefully, I would say I learned all the time. It doesn't seem like that because I keep on repeating many of them. But the idea would be that you would learn from your mistakes. So sometimes you just have to cross that line or make the mistake to know. But the thing about bodybuilding, this is in my book, and I talk about this a good bit, is it doesn't have to be a situation where you're in the dark as to what's actually going on. In terms of your body composition or the mirror. A good coach can help. It's very difficult to be objective with our bodies. If you're, someone who's like a classic car enthusiast, and you like build classic cars in your garage, and you go show them, the way a bodybuilder shows his physique on stage, you can step back and say, I could have done a better job on those rims. They're just not sparkling the way. And like the other guy, the rims look better on his car. It was clear that he should have placed higher than me in the car show. But with your body, it's a different story because that's you. Our egos see that as us. That's who you are. So to step back and say, my legs are small, and the guy's legs are better than mine, and he should have won. That's a hard thing for people to do, to separate themselves. There's so many instances. This would be a big tangent, but it's like just admitting that people are like, it's very difficult for humans to say that person's better than me in that. She's better looking than I am. He's smarter than I am. And for a bodybuilder, he's got a better physique than I am, and he's going to grow up. He's just a superior bodybuilder than me. And no matter how much willpower and desire and structure I have, the person's going to be better. They are superior to me. And that doesn't mean that at a very root human level, they are more valuable than you. In the notion of all men are created equal, or all women or humans are created equal. There's beauty in all of us. We can't have the ocean without all the waves in it. If all of a sudden there's an ocean with a missing wave, then that's I don't know what that is, because all of those waves need to be there for it to be complete. So we each have our beautiful role to play. And some people are going to be better than you. It's like you don't find people going every once in a while, like, that guy, like, he's he doesn't deserve to be that tall. Like, he's not taller than me. Well, yeah, he is. Stand next to him. No, he's not. Like, yes, he is. It's about 4 inches. Like, he's a better bodybuilder than you. And we don't like to. There's people are world class pianists. They're rocket scientists. There's all sorts of people who are exceptional, and we don't balk at that nearly the way we do in bodybuilding, because that's considered something that's they were born that way. Like, they had really smart parents, and they grew up playing the piano or whatever it might be. But I should be able to overcome those genetic limitations, because this is a representative of me. This is the vessel in which my ego moves about reality. And for you to tell me that I am inferior, well, I don't like the way that feels. No, I reject that notion. So anyway, that's sort of me waxing a little poetic on that, but it's a thing you can actually tackle a little bit and get some objective measurements of, using skin folds, using a third party, a coach. I have a way to do body composition where you employ DEXA and skin folds, and it gives you this where you can get those 8 and 12 pound numbers that I came up with. You can actually get those numbers with some level of certainty. You can look in the gym and just say, okay, so here's the thing, like, I've been training really hard, and I've done this program. I followed all the dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and the program was progressive overload based. And I went from using 220 pounds to using 225 pounds over 6 months, or I increased like my loads by 2% with the same number of reps. Would I expect, if that program's based on progressive overload, to have gained much muscle mass? Unless I changed my form tremendously, or I just developed a much better mind-muscle connection, and things are categorically different in that regard. Everything else being equal, if I don't get stronger, I'm not going to get bigger. So if I want to make my back bigger, and I'm using rack deads and bent over rows and weighted chins and those sorts of things to do that, unless I get bigger, stronger, I'm not going to probably get bigger. If I've been at this for a while. That has to happen. So you can't look back and say, oh, the program sucked. Potentially there could be reasons why it would, but if that strength gain didn't happen, so you can look at the strength numbers, the body composition numbers, other things, and then that allows you to step back and say, okay, this makes sense. This isn't because You know, there's this like this flawed aspect of me that I just can't grapple with. My ego can't handle it. It's because I didn't make the strength gains. So that's probably because I didn't rest enough or I didn't eat enough. And that's a less difficult thing to grapple with, I think, than the fact that you were just somehow inferior or incapable. So
100%. I think, when you're saying if because no one wants to be told that that someone is better than them or not as good, but judging, talking about actually looking at tracking your progress and looking at it, looking at the numbers and seeing what's happening, then you can exactly what you said about, you're going to learn more from the mistakes that you made, rather than sitting there like what you said, oh no, that person is just better than me. It's looking at, oh well, actually no, these things here are the things that I need to bring up a little bit. Do you think that in terms of the tracking progress, that you can track too much, or do you tend that people will track a little bit too, or don't track as much, and don't see what they need to work on? They just put it down to, oh well, that cycle just didn't work, rather than tracking the main things that they needed to.
I don't think in and of itself you could probably have too much information, but sometimes that I've seen this, the mindset behind someone who, and this isn't always the case, because it kind of depends what you do with the information. It very much does. But if someone is tracking every little thing and they've become very OCD, sometimes that the tracking and the repetition compulsion, almost you can kind of call it, like I gotta have all this, I weigh myself all the time, this sort of thing, that sort of takes the forefront of the usefulness of that information. So just because you go in and you track everything, you write all down in your logbook, doesn't mean that information is useful. It's only useful if you make use of it.
Yeah.
So you want to make use of it, and you look at it objectively to some degree. Yeah. Because it's funny. This is just because I've been at this for a while, so I've heard history repeats itself. I see the same questions over and over again, despite Google and despite people are still asking the same things. You can go on some of these discussion boards that have been around for decades now, and just type in a topic, and you'll see every 2 or 3 months the same question gets asked. And it's been the question's been asked 40 times, and it's the answers aren't getting any different really. So if you have that information, you want to be able to make use of it in some way, shape, or form, and not just have it and be able to look at it objectively. And so just having the information doesn't help. So you want to watch out for that. Not having enough, it can be obviously an issue, but the information is there, so you can say this explains why, or information can very much be the driving carrot too.
Yeah.
It can be the dangling carrot that says, okay, this is why logbooks, for people whose mentalities match really well with logbooks in the gym, is that is a nemesis right there. The logbook will be my bitch today could be the mantra of some people. And you say, I just need to get 1 or 2 more reps, or I'm going to add, I'm going to micro load and get a 1 1/4 pound plate or a 5 pound plate on each side. And that's all I got to do. And I just got to beat that. And you continue to do that. That shit adds up over time.
Yeah.
You add every 3 weeks, you come back to an exercise and you add 5 pounds. And you'd have some breaks in there. So you do that 10 or 12 times a year. That's 50 pounds in a year. Not that this would happen, but that's adding 150 pounds to an exercise over the course of 3 years. That's significant. But just logging those things and writing them down doesn't do you any good unless that's a motivating force or it's an informational force. So yeah, you can be, you can go too many, but most people don't look at it, don't do enough.
Yeah, I think with the tracking side of things, especially when we're talking about sort of looking at it as the areas to work on, is that it can be, I completely agree, it can be a motivator. And when you look in there and actually using that information, everything that you've done, I am a big believer in that. But also if things start going wrong and then all of a sudden well, actually, have you stopped tracking this? Have you been working on that? It can be actually a good indicator of, well, actually, you had your best. Looking back at training cycles and recovery and everything like that, you can actually look back and think, oh, well, actually, I've not been tracking this. I've dropped off on tracking that, so I want to add that back in. And then all of a sudden, that's another element that you can work on to work with, and that's going to be down to a common theme throughout this is, what are your goals depending on that in that cycle, and as well based on the person, because the information that they've got to use has to motivate them and be useful to them, so that they can get the most out of it, which I think is a good way of looking at it when it comes to tracking anything.
I mean, the analogy with taking a trip in a car is actually pretty apt here. So you have a destination. You want to get from Tampa, Florida to Los Angeles, California, and you have a certain time frame like to get there. And let's say you want to have like a certain gas mileage too, so you want to keep your speed at certain speed so you don't exceed that. And that would be maybe representative by analogy of your body composition changes. And so you're driving along, and you're looking at your fuel economy. You're looking at how full your gas tank is. You're looking at, I'm going to make it there on time. Like, what's my estimated time of arrival? Those sorts of things. So you got all this information that's allowing you to say, I'm going to take this route, go around this accident, paying attention to all these different things. But the whole purpose is to get from Florida to California. But you could have someone who is like, they've got every gadget, like to tell them, like they know like the temperature in their engine, and they know the economy, and they know, they've got a compass and several compasses going and all this sort of stuff. And they're just like reading the data, and they're just looking, but they don't know where they're going. And they're just like, and then the next thing up in North Dakota, it's like, well, what happened in California? It's like, I don't know. I was paying attention to my gas mileage, and I was going, I was using this little app that gets me the cheapest gas, and I was driving at the perfect speed. It's like, but where were you going? You didn't have a destination. You didn't have goals.
Yeah.
So, and one thing I wanted to add too about tracking and training and just the whole process in general is that, and I steal this from a guy who used to be the world's foremost expert on exercise adherence. His name was Rod Dishman. I mentioned him many times. He was at University of Georgia, and then he sort of switched away from that. And I looked very forward to taking his exercise psychology class when I was in grad school there, so I could learn the secrets of how to get people to exercise, to keep them exercising. And there's various things that will help. There's no doubt about that. But in large part, his sort of conclusion after looking at that for quite a while is that we're creatures of immediate gratification.
Yeah.
So there's got to be like some like carrot that's dangling. There's got to be something that like makes it fun and interesting. So for some people who are like at that OCD sort of grouping, like they get something out of just making sure their hands are clean, and that they clap the chalk 3 times, and the plates are always pointed inward, and all the other things like that for them, that routine and monitoring those things is that's for them, that's immediately gratifying. That there's something worthwhile about the endeavor when they do all of that. And that may not mean doing all those things may not mean they make the progress, because they're so focused on the immediate gratification of just going through those very particular and specific motions, which are good in and of themselves, but not, it's like looking at all the dials and the readouts without keeping the destination in mind. You're tracking, but your GPS isn't taking you to the destination which you've set forth.
Yeah.
So
no, sorry, go on.
Yeah, so we're kind of finish the other side of that.
The
analogy is that, so if you don't like doing all the tracking, like you want to get from point A to point B, and you don't like the track, is like, oh, this is a pain in the ass. I just hate. I got my groove going. I want to get in the gym and just like go after it, and I don't want to have to stop and write shit down and pay. Like I just want to like go and just train like a madman and just go bonkers and enjoy the workout and enjoy the food and enjoy the process. Finding some way to make those tracking behaviors and those things enjoyable and connect those with the process can be important too. So that also feeds into that immediate gratification need that we have. So it's like, so let's say like you got a training partner, and like you don't care about like what some damn DEXA tells you and like what your skin fold numbers are. You just want to be big, jacked, and be shredded when you get on stage. but you got a training partners. It's like, so, like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to make a competition, and so you can gain the most fat-free mass, and with the least amount of. So the ratio of muscle to fat, we're going to see who can do that the best in the next 3 months. So you start doing that, and you take each other's skin folds, because you can do his back and he can do yours. You can't reach there, and you talk shit for like the last 2 months. Like, you're looking a little flabby there. You're not gaining for sure. Like, how much did you put on that incline press? I didn't see it. You didn't add anything for like the last. I don't think you're gaining any muscle, man. You might as well just give up and just give me the $100 from this bet. So you make that part of the fun of the activity. You make that part of the reward of the activity. So that can be like that's a contract you can have with. That's a social support strategy. Actually, you can have a contract with a spouse or a training partner or what have you. And so you make the tracking part of the process that's fun. And like for some people, like that's why people do logbooks on discussion boards, is because there's like this was the predecessor to like you post your picture on Instagram and then you like check every 30 seconds to see how many likes you have, or like you watch them come in on your phone. It's like, ooh, the dopamine's just floating all like crazy in my head. Well, you could post your log. It's like, here's my update, and I did this, like increase in 2 reps, increases, and you have people come in your log and they're genuinely interested, and they said, nice work, man. It's like your calves are growing like crazy. That's awesome. You found a solution for that, or so you have social interaction that comes from that. And that may be the carrot that gives you some gratification from the log booking and sticking to that. So it creates some accountability that's not just forced. Like, Jesus, if I don't send my coach my check-in, like he's going to beat my ass, and I'm going to feel like, I wasted my $300 that I paid him or her. It actually makes it fun. It's like, I'm going to get something good, and I'm going to learn something. And like someone says, dude, you need to stop doing the Cheesecake Factory on Sundays because you're just getting fat or whatever. Yeah. So figuring out a way to make the tracking part of the fun of the process, and connecting that, of course, to ideally the situation where that tracking is emphasizing that you are going to the right direction. Yeah. So it's kind of like you're on a long road trip and you see Los Angeles, 455 miles. It's like, yes, that's only like 6 hours of driving or whatever. You can get there, as opposed to, Laramie, Wyoming, 4 hours is like, I am way off track. That's not good. Like, that's not what you want. But if you've been tracking along and you keep on seeing those street signs that tell you, this way to the beach or whatever, then you connected all of that with the enjoyment of the process. And then it's all fun. Even the stuff you don't like to do, because it's connected with fun, and you can find a way to make it fun. I would have, like, some people don't even like to work out. It's funny you said, like, we all go into the gym to work out because we like it. It's like a lot of people don't. My mom does, and my mom has to go with a trainer. She doesn't she would never work out whatsoever. She always has to work out with a trainer. But she has found trainers who like to gab, and she loves to chat. So they just distract her. She goes for an enjoyable conversation that outweighs the pain that she has to go through to get the workout in, because she knows it's good for her. She likes how it makes her look and all those other things. Yeah. So I would tell people, like, find a way to connect the workouts or the progress to something fun. You can put this in a contract where, if I lose my goal of 2 pounds each month, then I'm going to take myself to the mall and treat myself to $100 of whatever I want in terms of new clothing. That might work for a woman. Or, I'm going to go on, the site where I buy stuff from my hot rod, and I'm going to, buy like some of the $200 to accessorize my Corvette or whatever it might be if you're a guy. So you reward yourself. You connect the endeavor to things that provide some dangling carrot, either immediate or like very soon to be immediate gratification. And then the tracking will happen, and then it becomes connected. You train that, it's a little bit of operant conditioning, Pavlovian type of thing. It's like you don't feel like, well, why am I'm not tracking. I didn't write that down. Hold on, let me write that down. Because then you start thinking, like, what I beat that feels really good. I beat that by 3 reps. I can write +3 on my logbook. I like that. That becomes something that you like. So you can figure out ways to do that, and a good coach can help you figure those out, or maybe some people can just take this information and employ that if it resonates with them. But so there's all sorts of ways. Everyone's different when it comes to tracking and how they should employ it and how it can be useful for them.
Definitely, and I think it sort of comes full circle when we were chatting about when it started, and you mentioned there, depending on what your goals are, and as we've been chatting of, the same question gets asked, a few times, but sometimes the answers are still there. But with everything else that, especially now that there's so much information readily available, sometimes it needs to be filtered down and just put on a level where actually, do you know what? Look, yes, these are the guidelines that we're going to follow, but if you could swap and change and adapt and change and see how it works, and because I think that some of the biggest things is people are we mentioned. You can learn from making mistakes. Okay, this doesn't work. You mentioned there, right? Well, actually, you're feeling hungry. All right, we can increase food. You're feeling bloated, right? We can adjust that with nutrition, and adapt with training. And I think sometimes people are a little bit scared of failing and learning from those lessons, but that's part of it. The common theme throughout the chat was obviously, if you're on a road trip, that it's part of that journey that you've got to add it on. I mean, if you could just go in a straight line, it would be dead easy, and everyone would be walking around absolutely shredded all the time. But it's not always like that. So yeah, quite a few
guys are the worst with this. Like, we never want to use the instructions. I just figured this out. Like, okay, it's like you need like 2 PhDs in engineering in order to build this thing, but I'm not going to read the instructions because I can figure it out. And it's the same way. You don't want to make mistakes. We don't want to do those things. It's hard for folks to admit, but once you've made them, really, then it's just something substantially different about how that impacts your and it's a good thing for. It's the antithesis of bodybuilding. Bodybuilding is not a very modest pursuit. It's all about look how awesome I am. Yeah. And that's kind of the opposite of I fucked up.
Yeah.
Those are two very different perspectives and things to admit. So it can be hard for a bodybuilder to sort of live in those two worlds simultaneously, of trying to make themselves in a certain way, depending on who they're kind of doing it for, but you're trying to be as impressive. And you're trying to look, people say, look like a Greek god. You're trying to be like almost superhuman. And in order to become superhuman, you have to admit how fallible you are.
Yeah.
How fucked up is that? Like,
yeah,
that's
it's
a tough thing to grapple with, right?
Definitely. Quite a lot of topics covered there, and a couple of tangents thrown in. But the last question I always like to ask, from everything that we've chatted about today, I know there's been a couple of a good sort of words of wisdom in there, but what would be your sort of final take home points or words of wisdom for everyone listening?
I almost said it a couple times and I didn't, because I know some folks will listen to this and they know what I'm going to say too, probably. But so the Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach book is sort of a play on words to be your own Buddha, be your own guru, so to speak. So there's a Zen koan that I always invoke, or very often invoke. It is, if you meet a Buddha in the road, shoot him, which doesn't mean like you kill anybody, but if someone comes to you and they're giving off the energy or explicitly telling you this is the way or my way or the highway or what have you, then the image of that authority that is external to you is one that you should extinguish. So you don't shoot anybody, like, don't send death threats to the guy on Instagram. But when you think about it, kind of ultimately, anyone who you choose to follow is only because you're only following them because you've chosen to. So you're actually the guru that's filtering in the gurus. It's like there's all sorts of gurus you could follow, but you're the doorman. You're the one who gives them access into your brain. So if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, this is the way, my way, do it this way, or you're going to be wrong," my thought would be like, consider not letting them in the door. Consider asking them some more questions and say, "Well, why is that? Why do you think that?" And then realize that you ultimately are the person who's filtering all that decision making, and recognize that you're the one who's in the driving seat, and don't give yourself enough credit for that. And you're smarter than you think. Sometimes you're not so smart. There's lots of things going on in our brains that we don't know about, but also don't diminish your own ability to make decisions simply with common sense and trusting your intuition. So
I think that's Yeah, I think that's a good words of wisdom to finish on, and it goes back to we mentioned it at the start of the chat. Be curious. If you feel like you know everything, then you need to go out and read more. But ultimately, it's going to be it's going to be down to you to find the information that fits with you, and why is it they're saying that, but someone else is saying something else, and come to your own decisions, which is I think is a good way to be. Thanks a lot for taking the time to jump on, Scott. I really enjoyed that. A lot of topics covered. But for everyone listening as well, who might want to see the books that you've put out there, or the content and the other podcasts that you've put out there, where can people find you and see the content that you put out?
Instagram, it's fortitude_training. You can just put in Scott Stevenson bodybuilding, and you'll get all the URLs that I've come up with. FortitudeTraining.net, BYOBBcoach.com. Actually, I have BeYourOwnBodybuildingCoach.com. And the books on Amazon. A lot of people like the hardcover. I'm kind of happy to see that. Because the
I must admit, I prefer an actual physical book. Yeah,
I will not probably do another ebook, except maybe as a Kindle, because those are more protected, because the PDFs get out and then they're free all over the place. And I think the people who get the free books and download them, they probably aren't making use of them, so it's not like they would have paid for them otherwise, because I just have the sense that the mindset that goes with getting stuff for free is not the same as with someone who values it in the way that you would need to if you're actually going to use it. But still you hate to see that, man. So but yeah, so book's on Amazon. The Fortitude Training book is an ebook. You can find that at fortitudetraining.net or anywhere you can find me. There's links all over the place. Should be easy to get. And I'll let folks know too, I have a discussion board, old school discussion board. If you buy the Fortitude Training book, it's $20. Check your purchase email. You can get on there. And I have been answering questions on the training system for 6 years now, however long it's been out. So there's every question I can imagine has been asked. So there's a huge repository on all sorts of things. I've got some guys come on there and ask me litanies of questions related to anything you can think of. Some very bizarre ones. So there's a lot of information there, and people can ask me questions. It's free with the book. I'm just there to make sure people can do the training system and employ it. I don't want to say, here you go, and now sink or swim. I want to make sure people make the best of what they paid for, what I've provided for them. So there's support there on that board for people.
Awesome. Thanks again, Scott, for taking the time to jump on. Really enjoyed that. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. I felt like halfway through that I should have been stopped and taking notes on a couple of things on there. But thanks again. Thanks to everyone listening, and I will see you all next week.